Marcus Rivera had learned to measure his days not by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the rhythms of a city that preferred to forget men like him existed. The cardboard beneath him provided little cushioning against the cold concrete of the downtown alley, but it was better than the metal grating he'd called home the week before. His worn military jacket, faded patches still visible from his service in Afghanistan, served as both blanket and pillow in the pre-dawn hours when the temperature dropped and the streets emptied of everyone except those who had nowhere else to go. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound that woke him wasn't the usual clatter of garbage trucks or the distant hum of early commuters. It was the frustrated muttering of someone clearly out of their element, followed by what sounded like tools being dropped onto pavement. Marcus opened his eyes and peered around the dumpster that had become his nighttime sanctuary, squinting against the harsh fluorescent light spilling from the back of an upscale coffee shop. A woman stood in the narrow space between buildings, her expensive business suit incongruous against the industrial backdrop of service entrances and utility meters. She was crouched beside what appeared to be a solar panel installation, her perfectly styled blonde hair falling forward as she examined a tangle of wires with the expression of someone who had encountered a problem well outside her expertise. Even from his hidden position, Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept checking her phone as if willing it to provide solutions to whatever technical challenge she was facing. Dr. Elena Vasquez had built her renewable energy empire on the principle that sustainable technology should be accessible to everyone, not just those who could afford premium installations. Her company, Zenith Solar, had started in her garage 15 years ago with nothing but a business plan and an unshakable belief that clean energy could transform communities. Now, at 42, she commanded a corporation worth over $8 billion, with installations across 3 continents and a research division that held more patents than some universities. But none of that expertise seemed relevant as she stared at the malfunctioning solar array that powered the community center she'd personally funded. The installation was supposed to be a showcase, a demonstration that renewable energy could work in urban environments while providing real benefits to underserved neighborhoods. Instead, the system had been plagued with problems since its installation 6 months ago, and this morning's complete failure felt like a metaphor for everything that was going wrong in her carefully controlled world. Her phone buzzed with another message from her head of security, reminding her that she was supposed to be in a climate-controlled boardroom reviewing quarterly projections, not standing in an alley at 6 in the morning trying to troubleshoot electrical problems. But Elena had learned long ago that the most important work often happened away from conference tables and PowerPoint presentations. Besides, today marked exactly 25 years since her younger brother David had disappeared from a homeless shelter just 12 blocks from where she now stood, and she'd developed a ritual of spending the anniversary doing something that might have helped someone like him. Marcus watched her struggle with the solar panel connections, recognizing the signs of someone who understood the theory, but lacked the practical experience to implement it. He'd seen the same expression on the faces of young officers fresh out of military academies, full of knowledge but short on the kind of hands-on expertise that only came from working with your hands in less than ideal conditions. His own experience with solar technology had been hard-earned during his deployment, where portable solar arrays often meant the difference between communication and isolation, between mission success and catastrophic failure. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was living on the streets while watching someone struggle with technology he could probably fix in his sleep. Marcus had always been good with his hands, the kind of person who could disassemble a radio and put it back together better than he'd found it. In Afghanistan, he'd been the go-to soldier for any kind of electrical or mechanical problem, earning a reputation as someone who could jury-rig solutions from spare parts and determination. Those skills had served him well in the military, but they'd proven less transferable to civilian life, especially when potential employers saw his homeless status as a liability, rather than recognizing the ingenuity required to survive on the streets. Elena's frustration was becoming more evident by the minute. She'd pulled off her suit jacket and rolled up her sleeves, attacking the problem with the methodical approach that had made her successful in business. But solar installations required more than systematic thinking. They demanded an understanding of how environmental factors affected electrical connections, how weather and time could create problems that weren't visible in blueprints or engineering specifications. A gust of wind caught several loose wires, and Elena stepped back quickly as sparks flickered near her hands. The movement was enough to convince Marcus that watching someone potentially electrocute themselves violated several principles he'd learned both in the military and on the streets. Sometimes you had to choose between maintaining your invisibility and doing what was right, and this situation clearly fell into the latter category. He emerged from his concealment slowly, making enough noise to announce his presence without startling her. Elena looked up sharply, her hand moving instinctively toward her phone, and Marcus could see the calculation in her eyes as she assessed whether he represented a threat or merely an inconvenience. He'd grown accustomed to that look. The way people's expressions shifted when they noticed his worn clothes, his unkempt appearance, the subtle signs that marked him as someone who existed on society's margins. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice calm and respectful, "I couldn't help but notice you're having some trouble with that solar array. I have some experience with similar systems, if you'd like a hand." Elena's first instinct was to decline politely and call building security. She'd been warned countless times about the risks of engaging with homeless individuals, particularly in isolated areas like service alleys. But something about Marcus's demeanor gave her pause. His posture was respectful but confident, and despite his obvious circumstances, he spoke with the precise diction of someone who'd received formal training. More importantly, he was offering help rather than asking for money, which contradicted most of her assumptions about interactions with homeless veterans. "You know about solar panels?" she asked, her skepticism evident but not unkind. Marcus gestured toward the installation with the economy of movement that came from years of military discipline. "I worked with portable solar arrays during my deployment in Afghanistan. Different scale, but the basic principles are the same. From what I can see, you've got a grounding issue that's causing the whole system to shut down as a safety measure." The accuracy of his assessment surprised Elena. She'd been working on the assumption that the problem was with the inverter or possibly the panel connections themselves. The idea that a grounding issue could cause such comprehensive system failure hadn't occurred to her, but it made perfect sense once Marcus explained it. She found herself studying his face more carefully, noting the intelligence in his eyes, and the way he examined the installation with the systematic approach of someone who understood both the technology and its potential failure points. "I'm Elena," she said, extending her hand despite every piece of professional. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now, back to the story. Advice she'd ever received about maintaining boundaries with strangers. "Marcus Rivera," he replied, shaking her hand with a firm grip that spoke of confidence and capability. "Sergeant, formerly of the 82nd Airborne, currently between permanent addresses." The introduction carried just enough self-deprecating humor to acknowledge his circumstances without dwelling on them, and Elena appreciated both his honesty and his dignity. She'd built her career on recognizing potential where others saw only problems, and something about Marcus suggested that his current situation didn't reflect his actual capabilities or character. "Well, Marcus, if you think you can diagnose the problem, I'd be grateful for your expertise. This system is supposed to be powering a community center that serves breakfast to about 200 people every morning, and right now they're running on backup generators that cost more per hour than most people make in a day." Marcus nodded and moved closer to the installation, his movements careful and deliberate as he examined the connections without touching anything that might be energized. Elena watched him work, noting how his expression shifted from casual interest to focused concentration as he traced the system's configuration with his eyes. Within minutes, he'd identified not just the grounding issue she'd mentioned, but also several other problems that would have caused difficulties, even if the primary fault were corrected. "The grounding rod isn't making proper contact," he explained, pointing to a connection point that looked identical to all the others from Elena's perspective. "But you've also got corrosion on several of the DC connections, and whoever did the installation didn't account for thermal expansion in the mounting hardware. This system was probably working fine when it was first commissioned, but environmental factors have been degrading the connections over time." The diagnosis was more comprehensive than Elena had expected, and certainly more accurate than the reports she'd received from the installation company that had charged her corporation nearly $50,000 for what was supposed to be a premium system. Marcus was describing problems that would require not just technical knowledge to identify, but also the kind of practical experience that came from working with solar technology in challenging conditions. "How long would it take to fix these issues?" she asked. Marcus considered the question carefully, examining the available tools and materials. "If I had access to basic electrical supplies and about 3 hours of uninterrupted work time, I could have this system running better than it was originally designed to operate. But I'd need to make some modifications that might not match the original installation specifications. Elena found herself facing a decision that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. Every rational consideration suggested that she should thank Marcus for his assessment and arrange for her company's technical team to address the problems through proper channels. But something about his confidence and competence, combined with the fact that the community center was currently spending hundreds of dollars per day on generator fuel, made the unconventional approach seem suddenly reasonable. The decision to trust Marcus with repairing the solar installation marked the beginning of a partnership that neither Elena nor Marcus could have anticipated. Elena's driver, a professional security specialist named Torres, arrived to find his employer working alongside a homeless veteran, both of them covered in dust and completely absorbed in troubleshooting electrical connections. The site violated so many protocols that Torres initially assumed he was witnessing some kind of security incident. "Dr. Vasquez," Torres said carefully, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio, "is everything all right here?" Elena looked up from the junction box where she'd been holding a flashlight while Marcus rewired the grounding connections, suddenly aware of how the situation must appear to her security team. She was crouched in an alley, her expensive suit rumpled and stained, working with a homeless stranger on what could easily be perceived as vandalism of her own property. "Everything's fine, Torres. Mr. Rivera is helping me repair the community center's solar installation. Turns out the problems we've been having weren't design flaws, but installation errors that he's been kind enough to correct." Torres remained skeptical, but Elena's calm demeanor and obvious familiarity with the technical work being performed suggested that, whatever was happening, it was happening with her full consent and participation. Still, protocol demanded that he remain nearby, and Elena found herself grateful for both his protective presence and his professional discretion. Marcus had worked steadily through the morning, his movements efficient and purposeful as he addressed each problem systematically. Elena had initially intended to observe from a safe distance, but found herself drawn into the work, holding tools and asking questions about the modifications he was making. Her theoretical knowledge of solar technology was extensive, but watching Marcus work gave her insights into the practical considerations that separated functional installations from optimal ones. The original installers focused on meeting code requirements. Marcus explained as he replaced a corroded connector with one that would better withstand environmental exposure. But they didn't think about how these connections would perform after 5 years of thermal cycling and moisture exposure. Military installations taught me to think about how systems would function under stress, not just how they would look on inspection day. The comment resonated with Elena in ways that extended beyond solar technology. Her entire business philosophy was built on creating systems that would function reliably over decades, not just long enough to satisfy warranty requirements. The fact that Marcus intuitively understood this principle, despite his current circumstances, suggested a depth of thinking that impressed her more than most of the engineering consultants she employed. As the morning progressed, Elena found herself asking Marcus about his military service, his experience with renewable energy, and eventually, his current situation. His answers were honest without being self-pitying, matter-of-fact about the challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life without dwelling on the systemic failures that had contributed to his homelessness. He spoke about his service with pride, his technical skills with confidence, and his current circumstances with the pragmatic acceptance of someone who had learned to focus on solutions rather than problems. "I've been on the streets for about 8 months now," he said as he tested the repaired connections with a multimeter Elena had retrieved from her car. "Lost my apartment when the construction job ended and couldn't find steady work fast enough to keep up with rent. Most employers see the homeless thing as a liability, even when you've got skills and experience. It's easier to hire someone with a permanent address than to take a chance on someone who's living day to day." Elena understood the economic logic that Marcus described, but found herself troubled by the waste of human potential it represented. Here was someone with demonstrable technical expertise, military training, and a work ethic that had led him to volunteer his time to help a stranger, and yet he was sleeping in alleys because conventional hiring practices couldn't accommodate his circumstances. "What kind of work are you looking for?" she asked, as Marcus completed the final connections and prepared to test the repaired system. "Anything that pays fairly and uses what I know," he replied. I'm good with electrical work, mechanical systems, problem solving in general. I'd prefer something that matters, that makes a difference in people's lives. But honestly, I'm not in a position to be too selective about purpose versus paycheck. Elena nodded thoughtfully as Marcus activated the repaired solar installation. The system came online smoothly, its indicators showing optimal performance levels that exceeded the original specifications. The transformation was remarkable, not just in terms of technical functionality, but in the way Marcus's competence had challenged her assumptions about homelessness, unemployment, and the relationship between circumstances and capability. "Marcus," she said as they gathered the tools and prepared to clean up the work area, "would you be interested in consulting on some other solar installations? I've got several community projects that could benefit from someone with your practical experience." The offer was spontaneous, driven more by recognition of Marcus's abilities than any formal hiring process. Elena's company employed dozens of engineers and technicians, but most of them approached problems from theoretical perspectives, applying textbook solutions to real-world challenges. Marcus's hands-on expertise, combined with his understanding of how systems performed under adverse conditions, represented exactly the kind of practical knowledge her projects needed. Marcus paused in his cleanup, studying Elena's expression to determine whether the offer was genuine or merely polite gratitude for his morning's work. "I'd be interested," he said carefully, "but I should probably mention that my current living situation doesn't exactly support conventional employment arrangements. No permanent address, no reliable transportation, no business wardrobe." Elena waved off his concerns with the same decisiveness she brought to business negotiations. "Those are logistical issues, not qualifications problems. If you're willing to work, we can figure out the practical details. My company has corporate housing for temporary assignments, and I can arrange transportation to job sites. The question is whether you're interested in the work itself." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez, the community center's director, who had come to check on the solar installation that had been causing problems for months. She was a small woman in her 60s, whose energy and determination seemed to exceed her physical stature, and her expression brightened visibly when she saw the system's status indicators showing optimal performance. "Dr. Vasquez, this is wonderful. We've been running on generators for 3 days, and the fuel costs were starting to affect our food budget. How did you manage to fix everything so quickly?" Elena gestured toward Marcus, who was putting tools back into her car's emergency kit. "Actually, Mr. Rivera deserves the credit. He diagnosed and repaired problems that our technical team had been unable to identify. The system should run more efficiently now than it did when it was first installed." Mrs. Rodriguez studied Marcus with the keen eye of someone who had spent decades working with people from all backgrounds and circumstances. She took in his worn clothing and obvious homeless status, but also noted the competence with which he had completed the technical work, and the respectful way he interacted with both women. "Mr. Rivera, I don't know how to thank you properly," she said. "This solar installation powers our kitchen, our computer lab, and our job training programs. When it's not working, we can't serve the people who depend on us. You've probably helped more people this morning than you realize." Marcus accepted her gratitude with the quiet dignity that had characterized his entire interaction with Elena. "I'm glad I could help, ma'am. It's a good system, just needed some attention to keep it running properly." As they prepared to leave, Elena found herself reluctant to end the morning's unexpected partnership. Marcus had demonstrated not just technical competence, but also the kind of practical problem-solving ability that her company valued in its most senior personnel. More importantly, he'd shown the kind of character that made people trustworthy colleagues and reliable team members. "Marcus," she said as Torres prepared to drive her to her first official appointment of the day, "I meant what I said about consulting work. Are you available to meet tomorrow morning to discuss some specific projects?" Marcus nodded, though his expression suggested he was still processing the rapid transformation of his circumstances from homeless veteran to potential consultant for a billion-dollar corporation. "I'll be available, Dr. Vasquez. Where would you like to meet?" Elena considered the question, aware that conventional meeting locations might not be accessible or comfortable for someone in Marcus's situation. "Do you know the downtown library on 5th Street? There's a quiet area on the 2nd floor where we could talk without interruptions. Say 9 o'clock? "I'll be there," Marcus confirmed, and Elena believed him. Something about his military bearings suggested that punctuality and reliability were ingrained habits, that his current circumstances hadn't diminished. As Torres drove her toward the corporate world of meetings and presentations that filled most of her days, Elena found herself thinking about the contrast between Marcus's practical competence and the theoretical expertise she encountered in most professional contexts. Her company employed hundreds of people with advanced degrees and impressive credentials, but few of them could have diagnosed and repaired the solar installation problems as efficiently as Marcus had that morning. The experience had also reminded her of her original motivation for entering the renewable energy industry. She'd started Zenith Solar not just to build a successful business, but to create technology that could improve people's lives, particularly in communities that had been underserved by traditional energy infrastructure. Working alongside Marcus to repair the community center's installation had reconnected her with that mission in ways that quarterly reports and board meetings never could. Her phone buzzed with the day's first crisis, a supply chain disruption that threatened to delay several major installations. Elena reviewed the details as Torres navigated through morning traffic, but part of her attention remained focused on tomorrow morning's meeting with Marcus. She found herself curious about his background, his technical training, and the circumstances that had led from military service to homelessness. More practically, she was interested in exploring how his expertise might contribute to her company's projects, and whether his unconventional perspective might help solve problems that conventional approaches had failed to address. The downtown library had become Marcus's daytime refuge during the months since he'd lost his apartment. It offered warmth, safety, and access to computers he could use for job searches and communication with a few friends who had remained in contact since his circumstances changed. The librarians had long since stopped questioning his presence, recognizing him as someone who caused no problems and actually helped other patrons with technical issues when they arose. On the evening before his meeting with Elena, Marcus used one of the library's computers to research Zenith Solar, trying to understand the scope and focus of the company that might offer him legitimate employment. What he discovered impressed and slightly intimidated him. Elena's company was a major player in renewable energy, with projects ranging from residential installations to utility-scale solar farms. The corporate website showcased installations in urban communities, rural cooperatives, and international development projects, all unified by a commitment to making clean energy accessible and affordable. Elena's personal biography revealed a trajectory that began with a PhD in electrical engineering and evolved through entrepreneurship to corporate leadership. She'd received numerous awards for innovation and social responsibility, had testified before Congress about renewable energy policy, and had committed substantial personal resources to programs that provided solar installations for low-income communities. The woman who had worked alongside him in an alley that morning was apparently one of the most influential figures in an industry that was reshaping global energy infrastructure. The realization might have been intimidating, but Marcus's military experience had taught him that competence and character mattered more than titles or credentials. Elena had treated him with respect despite his circumstances, had recognized his expertise despite his lack of formal credentials, and had offered him opportunity based on demonstrated ability rather than conventional qualifications. Those qualities suggested someone worth working with, regardless of her corporate status or personal wealth. Marcus arrived at the library 15 minutes early, partly from habit and partly from an awareness that Elena's time was probably scheduled more precisely than his own. He'd done his best to clean up his appearance, washing in the library's restroom and smoothing his hair, but his limited wardrobe meant that he still looked like someone who lived on the streets. The contrast with Elena's professional appearance would be obvious, but Marcus had learned to focus on what he could control rather than circumstances beyond his influence. Elena arrived exactly on time, and Marcus appreciated both her punctuality and the fact that she'd chosen a relatively casual outfit, rather than the formal business attire she'd worn the previous morning. Her approach suggested someone who was making an effort to minimize the social distance between them, and Marcus responded to that consideration with gratitude and increased confidence. "Good morning, Marcus," she said as they settled into chairs in the library's quiet study area. "Thank you for meeting me here. I thought this might be more comfortable than a corporate conference room." "I appreciate that, Dr. Vasquez, and thank you again for yesterday's opportunity. It felt good to do work that mattered, to use skills that I'd started to think might not be relevant anymore." Elena opened a tablet and showed Marcus photographs of several solar installations, each representing different technical challenges in community contexts. "These are some of the projects I'd like your input on," she said. "They're all community-focused installations, where practical expertise matters as much as engineering theory." The projects were diverse and impressive. A solar installation at a homeless shelter that needed to be robust enough to withstand vandalism while remaining accessible for maintenance. A rural community system that had to function reliably despite limited local technical support. An urban installation that required integration with aging electrical infrastructure while meeting modern efficiency standards. Each project represented exactly the kind of practical problem-solving that Marcus's military experience had prepared him to address. "What kind of input are you looking for?" Marcus asked, studying the technical specifications and community contexts Elena had provided. "Honest assessment of what works and what doesn't," she replied. "Most of my technical staff approaches these projects from engineering perspectives, focusing on optimal performance under ideal conditions. But these installations need to function in real-world environments where maintenance might be delayed, where weather creates unexpected challenges, where the people using the systems might not have technical backgrounds." Elena's description matched perfectly with Marcus's understanding of how technology functioned outside controlled environments. Military installations had taught him to design systems that would work even when conditions were far from optimal, when maintenance resources were limited, and when users might be operating under stress or without extensive technical training. "I'd be very interested in contributing to these projects," Marcus said, "but I should ask about the practical arrangements. You mentioned corporate housing and transportation, but I want to make sure I understand what kind of commitment you're looking for and what kind of relationship this would be." Elena appreciated his directness and his focus on practical considerations. "I'm thinking about a consulting arrangement initially, project-based work that would let us see how well we work together before making any long-term commitments. The corporate housing would be a furnished apartment that we maintain for temporary assignments, available as long as you're working on active projects. Transportation would be company vehicle or reimbursement for travel to job sites." The arrangement sounded almost too good to be true, but Elena's matter-of-fact presentation suggested she was describing standard business practice rather than charity. Marcus found himself cautiously optimistic while remaining aware that circumstances could change as quickly as they had improved. "There's one other thing," Elena continued, her expression becoming more serious. "The work I'm describing would require security clearances for some projects, background checks, and eventually integration with teams of people who might have different assumptions about homelessness and military service. I want to make sure you're comfortable with that level of scrutiny and social complexity." Marcus considered the implications carefully. Security clearances and background checks weren't problematic. His military record was exemplary, and his current circumstances resulted from economic factors rather than personal failings. The social challenges might be more difficult to navigate, but his military experience had involved working with diverse groups under challenging conditions, and he was confident in his ability to earn respect through competence and professionalism. "I'm comfortable with background checks and security clearances," he said. "As for working with people who might have preconceptions about my circumstances, I'd prefer to let my work speak for itself. People who judge based on assumptions rather than performance probably aren't people I'd want to work with long-term anyway." Elena smiled at his response, recognizing the confidence and pragmatism that had impressed her during their first meeting. "In that case, Marcus, I'd like to offer you a trial period on 3 specific projects, starting with an installation at a veterans housing facility that's been having persistent technical problems. The pay would be $200 per day plus expenses, with the option to extend based on results." The offer exceeded Marcus's expectations in terms of both compensation and the meaningfulness of the work itself. A veterans housing facility represented exactly the kind of project where his background and expertise would be most relevant, where his understanding of both technical requirements and community needs could make a genuine difference. "I accept," he said without hesitation. "When do we start?" Elena pulled out her phone and began coordinating logistics with the efficiency that had made her successful in business. "I'll have corporate housing available by this afternoon, and we can visit the veterans facility tomorrow morning to assess the technical problems." "Are you comfortable starting that quickly?" Marcus nodded, though part of him was still processing the rapid transformation of his circumstances. 24 hours ago, he'd been a homeless veteran sleeping in an alley. Now he was a consulting engineer with corporate housing and meaningful work that aligned with his skills and values. The change felt surreal. But Elena's professional approach and clear expectations helped ground the opportunity in practical reality. As they concluded their meeting and prepared to handle the logistics of Marcus's transition from homelessness to employment, Elena found herself reflecting on the unexpected direction her morning had taken. She'd come to the library expecting a routine discussion about technical consulting, but the conversation had evolved into something more significant. Marcus represented not just technical expertise but also a perspective on renewable energy that connected directly with the social mission that had originally motivated her entrepreneurship. For Marcus, the meeting represented more than just employment, opportunity. Elena's willingness to look beyond his circumstances and recognize his capabilities suggested that his military training and technical skills retained value in civilian contexts. More importantly, the work she was offering would allow him to contribute to projects that served communities similar to the one he'd been part of during his months on the streets. As Elena drove away from the library, she realized that hiring Marcus had started as recognition of his technical competence, but was evolving into something more personal. His quiet dignity, his practical wisdom, and his commitment to helping others reminded her of values that sometimes got lost in corporate contexts. Working with him might benefit her projects, but it might also reconnect her with the principles that had originally driven her to enter renewable energy. For Marcus, the transition from library meeting to corporate housing felt like stepping into a different world, but one where his skills and experience were valued rather than dismissed. The apartment Elena's company provided was modest but comfortable, a space where he could shower, sleep, and prepare for work without the constant vigilance that street life required. For the first time in months, he could focus entirely on future possibilities rather than immediate survival. The Veterans Housing Facility would be their first official project together, but both Elena and Marcus understood that they were building something more substantial than a consulting relationship. They were creating a partnership that bridged different worlds, corporate and community, theoretical and practical, housed and homeless, and discovering that those bridges could strengthen both sides. That evening, as Marcus prepared for his first day of legitimate work in nearly a year, he felt a cautious optimism that extended beyond immediate employment. Elena had offered him more than just a job. She had offered him the chance to rebuild a career, to contribute his expertise to meaningful projects, and to regain the sense of purpose that military service had provided. Tomorrow would begin the process of discovering whether this unexpected opportunity could develop into the kind of work that justified hope for a stable future. Elena spent the evening reviewing technical reports from the Veterans Housing Facility, preparing for the assessment she and Marcus would conduct together. But part of her attention remained focused on the broader implications of their emerging partnership. Marcus's expertise could benefit her project significantly, but his perspective might also influence how she approached the relationship between technology and community, between corporate success and social responsibility. The morning would bring their first official collaboration, testing whether the competence and compatibility they discovered during their initial meeting could translate into effective professional partnership. Both Elena and Marcus approached that prospect with confidence tempered by awareness that successful relationships required more than good intentions and mutual respect. But their shared commitment to work that mattered, combined with complementary expertise and compatible values, suggested strong foundations for whatever they might build together. The Veterans Haven Facility stood like a fortress against the urban decay that surrounded it, its brick walls weathered but solid, its windows reinforced with security mesh that spoke to the complex realities of serving a population that society often preferred to forget. Marcus stood beside Elena in the parking lot, studying the building that would be their first official project together, noting details that most visitors would miss. The solar panels on the roof were clearly visible, but their positioning suggested installation by someone who understood codes, but not optimization. Several panels showed signs of shading from nearby structures, while others appeared to have connectivity issues that manifested as dark spots against the morning sky. Elena reviewed the facility's technical reports on her tablet, her expression growing more concerned as she absorbed the scope of the problems they'd been called to address. The solar installation had been operational for only 8 months, yet it was already performing at 60% of its designed capacity. Worse, the system's declining efficiency was affecting the facility's ability to maintain consistent power for essential services, forcing administrators to rely increasingly on expensive grid electricity that strained their already limited budget. Director James Patterson emerged from the building to greet them, his appearance reflecting the exhaustion that came from managing a facility where every day brought new challenges and insufficient resources. He was a man in his late 50s whose bearing suggested military experience, though the stress lines around his eyes spoke to years of fighting battles that victories were measured in small increments rather than decisive outcomes. "Dr. Vasquez, thank you for coming personally," Patterson said, shaking Elena's hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to professional interactions. "And you must be the technical consultant I was told about." He extended the same courtesy to Marcus, though his expression suggested curiosity about the unconventional pairing of a corporate CEO and a consultant whose appearance clearly indicated recent familiarity with street life. Marcus had wrestled with wardrobe decisions that morning, ultimately choosing his cleanest clothes while accepting that his circumstances were obvious to anyone who looked carefully. Elena had suggested that honesty about his background might actually be advantageous when working with veterans who understood the challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life, and Marcus hoped her assessment was accurate. "Marcus Rivera, formerly 82nd Airborne," he said, offering Patterson the kind of introduction that established credibility through shared experience rather than corporate credentials. "I understand you're having some performance issues with your solar installation." Patterson's demeanor shifted noticeably at the military identification, his posture straightening slightly as he recognized a fellow veteran. "Afghanistan or Iraq?" he asked, the question carrying the weight of shared understanding about deployments that had shaped an entire generation of service members. "Afghanistan, 2 tours, mostly FOB Shank, and some forward operating positions in Paktika province." Marcus's response was matter-of-fact, providing enough detail to establish his credentials without dwelling on experiences that civilian audiences often found uncomfortable. Patterson nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had found common ground. "Iraq, 3 deployments, mostly around Baghdad and Fallujah. Good to have someone working on this who understands what these guys have been through." He gestured toward the building behind him, where Marcus could see faces in several windows, residents observing the arrival of outsiders with the wariness that characterized people who had learned to be cautious about promises of help. The facility housed 43 veterans in various stages of transition from homelessness to stable housing, ranging from recent arrivals who were still adapting to having walls and doors, to long-term residents who were working toward independent living arrangements. The solar installation was supposed to reduce operational costs while providing job training opportunities for residents interested in learning renewable energy skills. Instead, its declining performance had become a source of frustration that affected both budget and morale. Elena studied the facility's energy consumption data, while Marcus and Patterson discussed the installation's history and performance trends. The numbers painted a picture of a system that had started with promise but quickly developed problems that conventional maintenance approaches had been unable to resolve. Multiple service calls from the original installation company had resulted in temporary improvements followed by renewed degradation, suggesting underlying issues that quick fixes couldn't address. "The residents have started making jokes about the solar panels being as unreliable as VA appointments," Patterson said with the gallows humor that veterans use to cope with systemic failures. "Which wouldn't be funny if we weren't spending an extra $800 a month on electricity that the solar system was supposed to eliminate." Marcus examined the facility's electrical infrastructure while Elena reviewed warranty documentation and service records. The building's power needs were significant, but not unusual for a residential facility, requiring consistent electricity for lighting, heating, cooling, kitchen equipment, and the computer lab where residents worked on job applications and educational programs. The solar installation should have been capable of meeting most of those needs during daylight hours while feeding excess power back to the grid, but current performance suggested the system was barely covering basic lighting requirements. "Before we climb up to examine the panels directly," Marcus said, "I'd like to understand the facility's daily routines and how power usage fluctuates throughout the day. Sometimes installations fail because they're designed for theoretical usage patterns rather than actual operational needs." Patterson appreciated the practical approach, leading them through a tour that revealed details most technical assessments overlooked. The kitchen operated on a schedule that maximized solar availability, but residents' personal routines created power demands that peaked during evening hours when solar production was minimal. The computer lab was heavily used during mid-morning hours when many residents had appointments or job interviews, creating spikes in electrical demand that the solar system struggled to accommodate. Elena found herself impressed by Marcus's systematic approach to understanding the relationship between technology and human behavior. Most technical assessments focused exclusively on equipment performance, but Marcus was examining how the installation functioned within the complex social ecosystem of the facility. His questions revealed insight into both engineering principles and the practical realities of institutional life that came from personal experience with both military and homeless communities. The roof inspection confirmed Marcus's suspicions about installation quality and design optimization. The panels themselves were high-quality equipment, but their positioning reflected theoretical calculations rather than practical considerations about shading, maintenance access, and weather exposure. More problematically, the electrical connections showed signs of environmental degradation that suggested inadequate weatherproofing and component selection inappropriate for the local climate. This is exactly the kind of installation that gives solar technology a bad reputation, Elena said as they examined connections that had been completed to code but not to best practices. Everything meets minimum requirements, but nobody thought about how the system would perform after a year of thermal cycling and moisture exposure. Marcus traced the system's configuration with practiced eyes, identifying problems that ranged from obvious to subtle. Several panels were partially shaded by building features that hadn't been considered during design. The inverter was positioned in a location that maximized convenient access but exposed it to temperature extremes that reduced efficiency and accelerated component aging. Most significantly, the grounding system showed signs of corrosion that created safety hazards while degrading overall performance. How long would it take to correct these problems? Patterson asked, clearly hoping for solutions that could be implemented quickly and affordably. Marcus considered the question carefully, balancing technical requirements against the facility's operational constraints and budget limitations. Some of the fixes could be completed in a few days, others would require more extensive work that might temporarily disrupt power availability. The optimal approach would be to phase the repairs so that the facility maintains continuous operation while we systematically address each issue. Elena appreciated Marcus's awareness of the facility's operational needs and his recognition that technical perfection couldn't come at the expense of service disruption. The veterans living at the facility depended on consistent power for basic needs, and any repair approach had to prioritize their stability and comfort above engineering convenience. What would a complete repair and optimization cost? She asked, already calculating whether Zenith Solar's community outreach budget could absorb the expense as part of their corporate social responsibility initiatives. Marcus's estimate was significantly lower than the quotes Patterson had received from conventional contractors, partly because his approach emphasized repair and optimization over wholesale replacement, and partly because his labor costs were structured as consulting fees rather than corporate overhead. More importantly, his proposal included training components that would enable facility staff and interested residents to perform routine maintenance themselves, reducing long-term operational costs while providing valuable job skills. The training aspect particularly appealed to Patterson, who had been looking for ways to expand the facility's educational offerings while building residents' confidence in their ability to contribute meaningfully to community projects. Several veterans had expressed interest in renewable energy careers, but practical training opportunities were limited and expensive. Marcus's proposal would provide hands-on experience with real equipment while solving immediate operational problems. Elena found herself watching the interaction between Marcus and Patterson with growing appreciation for the natural rapport that existed between veterans who had shared similar experiences. Their communication was efficient and direct, based on mutual understanding about practical constraints and achievable objectives. Both men focused on solutions rather than problems, and both demonstrated the kind of systematic thinking that military experience had instilled. When could we start? Patterson asked, clearly eager to move from assessment to implementation. Marcus looked to Elena for guidance about scheduling and resource allocation. That depends on Dr. Vasquez's timeline and the availability of replacement components. If we can get the necessary parts within a week, I could begin preliminary work next Monday and complete the major repairs within 10 days. Elena pulled out her phone to check corporate scheduling and vendor availability. Zenith Solar's supply chain relationships would enable rapid procurement of high-quality components, while her company's resources could support accelerated implementation timelines. I can have parts delivered by Friday, she said, and Marcus can begin work as soon as the components arrive. The commitment represented more than just technical problem-solving. It was Elena's investment in demonstrating that renewable energy could deliver reliable benefits to communities that had been underserved by conventional approaches. The Veterans Haven facility would become a showcase for practical solar installation while providing Marcus with a platform to prove his expertise and develop his consulting practice. As they prepared to leave the facility, Patterson extended an invitation that reflected the personal connections that had developed during their assessment. "Dr. Vasquez, Mr. Rivera, would you be interested in joining us for lunch?" "Nothing fancy. Just the kind of meal that brings people together to talk about real problems and practical solutions." Elena's first instinct was to decline politely and return to her office, where dozens of messages and decisions awaited her attention. But something about the facility's atmosphere and the genuine relationships she'd observed between staff and residents made the invitation appealing. Marcus had clearly established credibility with Patterson through shared military experience, and Elena found herself curious about the community that surrounded renewable energy projects rather than just the technology itself. The dining room buzzed with conversations that reflected the diverse backgrounds and experiences of the facility's residents. Veterans from different conflicts and service branches shared meals and stories, their interactions characterized by the mutual respect that came from understanding shared challenges. Several residents approached their table to thank Patterson for bringing technical expertise to address the solar problems, and Elena was struck by how personally invested they were in the facility's operational success. Marcus found himself in conversations that felt more natural than any professional interaction he'd experienced since leaving the military. The residents understood his background without requiring explanations, accepted his current circumstances without judgment, and respected his technical expertise based on demonstrated competence rather than credentials. For the first time since becoming homeless, he felt like he was among people who saw him as a complete person rather than a problem to be managed or avoided. Elena observed the social dynamics with the analytical perspective that had made her successful in business, but also with growing appreciation for the human relationships that gave meaning to technical projects. The solar installation wasn't just about reducing electricity costs or demonstrating renewable energy technology. It was about providing stability and hope to people who had sacrificed personal security in military service and were now working to rebuild their lives in civilian contexts. "Dr. Vasquez," said one resident, a woman in her 30s whose left arm bore the distinctive scars of improvised explosive device injuries, "I wanted to thank you for taking our solar problem seriously. Most contractors treat this place like charity work, do the minimum required, and move on. It's obvious you and Mr. Rivera actually care about getting things right." The comment resonated with Elena because it highlighted the difference between corporate social responsibility initiatives that were designed primarily for public relations value and projects that were genuinely intended to benefit communities. Working with Marcus on the Veterans Haven installation had reminded her that the most meaningful renewable energy projects were those that strengthened communities, rather than just reducing carbon emissions. As lunch concluded and they prepared to return to their respective responsibilities, Elena realized that the morning's assessment had accomplished more than technical evaluation. She had gained insight into how renewable energy could serve communities that faced genuine hardships, while Marcus had demonstrated his ability to work effectively with both corporate leadership and the veterans community that understood his background and valued his expertise. "Marcus," she said as they walked toward her car, "I'm convinced that this project will be successful, but I'm also thinking about broader applications for the approach we're developing. Would you be interested in expanding our collaboration beyond this single installation?" Marcus considered the implications of Elena's suggestion, recognizing both the professional opportunity and the personal significance of working on projects that served communities similar to the one that had sustained him during his months on the streets. "I'd be very interested," he said, "especially if it means continuing to work with facilities and organizations that serve veterans and homeless populations." Elena nodded, already envisioning a series of projects that would demonstrate renewable energy's potential to benefit underserved communities, while providing Marcus with the platform to establish himself as a specialist in practical solar installations. The Veterans Haven facility would be their proof of concept, but success there could lead to opportunities that were both professionally rewarding and personally meaningful. That afternoon, as Elena returned to corporate meetings and Marcus began detailed planning for the solar repairs, both found themselves energized by work that connected technical expertise with social purpose. The projects they were developing together would test whether renewable energy could deliver practical benefits to communities that needed them most, while also testing whether their emerging partnership could bridge the different worlds they represented. The next morning brought unexpected complications that threatened to derail their carefully developed plans. Elena arrived at her office to find her head of security, Director Sarah Chen, waiting with expressions that suggested urgent problems requiring immediate attention. Chen was a former FBI agent whose professional demeanor typically remained calm regardless of circumstances, but her current tension indicated situations that exceeded routine security concerns. Dr. Vasquez, we need to discuss some irregularities that have come to our attention regarding your new consulting arrangement, Chen said, settling into the chair across from Elena's desk with the methodical approach that characterized federal law enforcement professionals. Elena felt her stomach tighten with apprehension that she couldn't immediately identify. Marcus's background check had been completed according to standard procedures, revealing military service records that were exemplary and civilian circumstances that resulted from economic factors rather than personal failings. There had been no criminal history, no security concerns, no red flags that would justify Chen's obvious concern. What kind of irregularities? Elena asked, maintaining the professional composure that had served her well during previous crises, while mentally reviewing everything she knew about Marcus's background and qualifications. Chen opened a file that contained documents Elena didn't recognize, including what appeared to be investigative reports and communication records that suggested surveillance activities she hadn't authorized. We've received information suggesting that Mr. Rivera's involvement with your company may not be coincidental, she said, her tone carrying the careful neutrality that law enforcement professionals used when discussing ongoing investigations. Elena studied the documents Chen provided, trying to understand how routine consulting arrangements had become the subject of investigation and surveillance. The reports included detailed analyses of Marcus's movements, financial transactions, and communications that revealed a level of scrutiny typically reserved for suspected criminal activity or national security threats. Nothing in the documentation suggested illegal behavior, but the mere existence of such comprehensive surveillance raised questions about who had initiated the investigation and why. Sarah, I need you to explain what prompted this level of investigation, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of corporate leadership. Marcus Rivera is a consulting engineer working on community solar installations. His background is transparent, his qualifications are verifiable, and his work has been exemplary. I don't understand why he's being treated as a security threat. Chen's response revealed complexities that Elena hadn't anticipated, and that suggested forces beyond routine corporate security procedures. The investigation wasn't initiated by our department, she admitted. We received inquiries from federal agencies that are apparently tracking patterns of contact between homeless veterans and executives in technology industries. Mr. Rivera's interaction with you has been flagged as potentially significant for reasons that haven't been fully disclosed to us. The revelation that federal agencies were monitoring Marcus's activities struck Elena as both absurd and deeply troubling. The suggestion that homeless veterans who demonstrated technical competence were automatically subjects of suspicion violated principles of due process and social justice that Elena had always considered fundamental to American values. More personally, it threatened to destroy the picture partnership she and Marcus were building based on mutual respect and shared commitment to meaningful work. Who specifically is conducting this investigation? She asked, recognizing that understanding the source of the surveillance might provide insight into its motivations and scope. Chen consulted her notes with the precision that characterized her approach to security matters. The inquiries came from a joint task force that includes representatives from several agencies, but the lead contact is Agent David Morrison, from a division that focuses on domestic security considerations related to technology infrastructure. He's requested a meeting to discuss Mr. Rivera's access to renewable energy installations and the potential security implications. Elena felt a chill of recognition at the name David Morrison, though she couldn't immediately place where she had encountered it previously. The surname Morrison had significance in her family's history, connected to memories that she had spent years trying to understand and resolve. The possibility that the federal investigation of Marcus might somehow be related to her own background seemed unlikely but too coincidental to dismiss entirely. Sarah, I want you to arrange the meeting with Agent Morrison, but I also want our legal department involved from the beginning. If federal agencies are investigating my consulting arrangements, I need to understand the legal implications and protect both the company's interests and Mr. Rivera's rights. Chen nodded, though her expression suggested concerns that extended beyond routine legal precautions. Dr. Vasquez, there's one other thing. The investigation apparently includes questions about your family background, specifically about your brother David and the circumstances of his disappearance 25 years ago. I don't know why those issues are relevant to current security concerns, but Agent Morrison specifically mentioned wanting to discuss historical connections. The reference to David hit Elena like a physical blow, forcing her to confront memories and questions that had shaped her entire adult life. Her younger brother had disappeared from a homeless shelter 25 years ago, vanishing without trace despite extensive searches by both family and law enforcement. Elena had built her career partly as a way of honoring David's memory, creating programs that served communities similar to the one where he had last been seen. The idea that his disappearance might somehow be connected to current events seemed impossible but undeniably significant. Elena spent the rest of the morning canceling meetings and trying to understand how routine business decisions had become entangled with federal investigations and family history. Her legal team worked to establish the scope and legal basis for the surveillance activities, while Elena struggled to comprehend how Marcus's consulting work could possibly threaten national security or justify the level of attention it was receiving. Marcus knew nothing about the federal investigation when he arrived at the Veterans Haven facility that morning to begin preliminary work on the solar installation. He was focused on the systematic approach that would restore the system to optimal performance while providing training opportunities for interested residents. The technical challenges were straightforward, requiring methodical attention to detail rather than innovative solutions, and Marcus was looking forward to work that combined his expertise with meaningful community service. The first indication that circumstances had changed came when he noticed unmarked vehicles in the facility's parking lot, positioned with a strategic awareness that suggested law enforcement surveillance rather than routine visitors. Marcus's military training had taught him to be alert to environmental changes that might indicate threats, and the presence of professional watchers triggered instincts that had kept him alive during combat deployments. Director Patterson emerged from the building with an expression that mixed confusion with concern, clearly struggling to understand why his facility had become the focus of attention from people who identified themselves as federal agents but provided minimal information about their interests or authority. "Marcus, we need to talk," Patterson said, his voice carrying the tension that came from dealing with bureaucratic complications that threatened to disrupt programs that served vulnerable populations. "Some folks from various government agencies have been asking questions about you, about your work here, about your relationship with Dr. Vasquez." Marcus felt the familiar knot of anxiety that had characterized his interactions with government bureaucracies since leaving the military. His experiences with Veterans Administration services had taught him that federal agencies often approached veteran issues with suspicion rather than support, treating former service members as potential problems rather than people deserving assistance. The idea that his consulting work had attracted official attention suggested complications that could threaten both his emerging career and his personal security. "What kind of questions?" he asked, though he suspected that Patterson's information would be limited by the same bureaucratic secrecy that characterized most federal investigations. Patterson gestured toward his office, indicating a conversation that required privacy rather than the public setting of the facility's common areas. "Questions about your technical background, your access to infrastructure systems, your personal history since leaving the military. They seemed particularly interested in your current living arrangements and how you came to meet Dr. Vasquez." The focus on Marcus's homelessness and his relationship with Elena suggested investigations that went beyond routine security clearances and approached the kind of surveillance typically reserved for suspected criminals or security threats. Marcus couldn't understand how consulting on solar installations could justify such attention, but his military experience had taught him that government agencies often operated according to logic that wasn't apparent to civilians caught in their processes. "Did they indicate what kind of authority they were operating under?" Marcus asked, trying to understand whether the investigation represented legitimate security concerns or bureaucratic overreach that might be subject to legal challenge. Patterson shook his head with the frustration that came from dealing with officials who demanded cooperation while providing minimal information about their authority or objectives. They showed credentials and made it clear that this wasn't optional, but they didn't explain what law or policy justifies treating solar panel repair as a national security issue. Marcus realized that his emerging partnership with Elena had somehow become entangled with forces and histories that neither of them understood. The federal investigation threatened to destroy the professional relationship that had offered him hope for rebuilding his career and his life, while also potentially exposing Elena to complications that could affect her business and personal security. "Patterson, I need to contact Dr. Vasquez immediately," Marcus said, recognizing that coordination with Elena was essential for understanding and responding to whatever accusations or suspicions had triggered the investigation. And I need to understand what my rights are in this situation, whether I'm being accused of specific wrongdoing or just caught up in some kind of general surveillance program. Patterson nodded, though his expression suggested limited optimism about bureaucratic processes that treated veterans, service, and sacrifice as grounds for suspicion rather than respect. "Marcus, for what it's worth, everyone here knows you're a good man doing important work. Whatever these federal people think they're investigating, it doesn't change the fact that you've brought expertise and dedication to projects that serve people who need help." The affirmation meant more to Marcus than Patterson probably realized, providing confirmation that his character and competence were recognized by people who understood both military service and the challenges of civilian transition. But personal support couldn't protect him from federal investigations that might destroy his career prospects and force him back into the homelessness that had nearly destroyed his hope for the future. Elena received Marcus's call while she was meeting with her legal team about the federal investigation, and the convergence of their separate discoveries revealed the scope of whatever forces were working to disrupt their partnership. The suggestion that Marcus's consulting work represented security threats seemed absurd to anyone who understood either renewable energy technology or his personal background. But federal agencies operated according to priorities and procedures that weren't always subject to logical analysis. "Marcus, I think we're both caught up in something larger than consulting arrangements or solar installations," Elena said, her voice carrying the controlled tension that came from recognizing serious threats to both personal and professional security. "Federal agencies are asking questions about my family history, about my brother's disappearance 25 years ago, and apparently about connections that I don't understand yet." The mention of Elena's brother introduced elements that Marcus couldn't immediately process, suggesting family histories and personal tragedies that might somehow be connected to current events. The idea that his consulting work could be related to decades-old family mysteries seemed impossible, but Marcus had learned during military service that seemingly unrelated events often proved to be connected in ways that weren't apparent until after comprehensive analysis. "Dr. Vasquez, I think we need to meet with our respective legal representatives and try to understand what we're dealing with," Marcus said, recognizing that individual responses to federal investigations were less likely to be effective than coordinated strategies that addressed whatever accusations or suspicions had triggered official attention. Elena agreed, though she was increasingly convinced that the investigation represented more than routine security procedures. The references to her brother, the timing of the surveillance, and the focus on her relationship with Marcus suggested deliberate targeting that went beyond coincidental bureaucratic attention. Someone or some organization had reasons for wanting to disrupt their partnership, and understanding those motivations would be essential for protecting both their personal security and their professional futures. The federal investigation had transformed their promising collaboration into a complex challenge that would test not only their professional capabilities, but also their personal resilience and mutual trust. The projects they had planned together now faced uncertain futures, while their individual careers hung in the balance of forces they couldn't yet understand or control. As Elena and Marcus prepared to navigate the bureaucratic maze that threatened to separate them, they found themselves relying on the same qualities that had brought them together: practical problem-solving abilities, respect for each other's expertise and character, and commitment to work that served communities in need. The federal investigation would test whether those foundations were strong enough to withstand external pressures designed to destroy the partnership they were building together. The FBI field office in downtown Portland felt like a fortress designed to intimidate rather than serve, its concrete walls and minimal windows creating an atmosphere of institutional authority that Marcus recognized from military detention facilities. He sat beside Elena in the sterile conference room, both of them flanked by attorneys whose expensive suits contrasted sharply with the government-issued furniture and fluorescent lighting that created an environment deliberately stripped of comfort or personality. Agent David Morrison entered the room with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to controlling conversations through information asymmetry and bureaucratic leverage. He was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of precise appearance that suggested federal law enforcement training and career advancement through methodical attention to procedural details. What struck Marcus immediately was Morrison's eyes, which carried an intensity that seemed personal rather than purely professional. Elena studied Morrison's face with growing recognition that she couldn't quite place. something familiar about his features that reminded her of photographs and memories she'd spent years trying to understand. The resemblance was subtle but persistent, suggesting connections that her conscious mind hadn't yet processed, but that some deeper part of her awareness found significant. "Dr. Vasquez, Mr. Rivera, thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Morrison began, his tone professionally neutral despite the implied coercion of federal investigation. "I'm sure you're wondering why your consulting arrangement has attracted the attention of multiple agencies, and why we're asking questions about historical events that seem unrelated to current activities." Marcus's attorney, a veterans' rights advocate named Jennifer Walsh, immediately established the legal framework that would govern their interaction. "Agent Morrison, before we proceed, I need to clarify the legal basis for this investigation and whether my client is being accused of specific wrongdoing or is simply being questioned as a witness to activities that concern federal agencies." Morrison consulted his files with the deliberate pace that federal agents use to maintain control over information flow and meeting dynamics. "Mr. Rivera is not currently suspected of criminal activity, but his recent interactions with critical infrastructure systems have raised questions about potential security vulnerabilities that require investigation." The characterization of solar panel repair as interaction with critical infrastructure struck Elena as both technically accurate and deliberately misleading, designed to justify surveillance activities that would be difficult to support if described more precisely. Solar installations were indeed part of the electrical grid, but community-scale systems posed no meaningful security threats that would justify the level of federal attention they'd received. "Agent Morrison," Elena said, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of corporate leadership and public advocacy, "I need to understand how routine maintenance of renewable energy systems constitutes a security concern worthy of multi-agency investigation. Mr. Rivera's work involves replacing corroded connections and optimizing panel positioning, not accessing classified information or compromising critical systems." Morrison's response revealed the true focus of the investigation, while raising questions that neither Elena nor Marcus had anticipated. "Dr. Vasquez, our interest isn't limited to current activities. We're investigating patterns of contact between homeless veterans with technical expertise and executives in technology industries, particularly cases where those relationships develop under circumstances that seem coincidental but may represent deliberate targeting." The suggestion that Marcus had deliberately sought out Elena rather than encountering her by chance struck both of them as absurd, but Morrison's implication carried darker undertones about surveillance programs and suspicion that extended far beyond their individual circumstances. The idea that federal agencies were monitoring homeless veterans as potential security threats violated principles of due process and social justice that Elena had always considered fundamental to democratic society. Marcus felt the familiar combination of anger and helplessness that had characterized his interactions with government bureaucracies since leaving the military. The suggestion that his technical competence made him suspicious rather than valuable represented exactly the kind of institutional prejudice that had contributed to his homelessness and complicated his efforts to rebuild his civilian career. "Agent Morrison," Marcus said, his military training helping him maintain composure despite his frustration, "I think you're suggesting that I somehow manipulated circumstances to meet Dr. Vasquez for purposes that you haven't clearly defined. I'd like to understand what evidence supports that theory and what you think my motivations might have been." Morrison opened another file, revealing surveillance photographs that captured Marcus and Elena's first meeting in the alley behind the community center. The images had been taken from multiple angles with professional equipment, suggesting a level of monitoring that had been in place before their initial encounter. The existence of such comprehensive surveillance raised questions about who had been watching and why their meeting had been anticipated rather than merely observed. "Mr. Rivera, these photographs were taken as part of an ongoing investigation into individuals who have been attempting to make contact with specific technology executives," Morrison explained. "Your presence in that location at that time suggests advanced knowledge of Dr. Vasquez's schedule and personal involvement in the community center's solar installation." Elena studied the surveillance photos with growing disbelief and anger at the violation of privacy they represented. The images captured intimate moments of their first collaboration, showing her crouched beside the solar panels while Marcus explained technical problems and solutions. The idea that federal agencies had been monitoring her personal activities without her knowledge or consent violated both legal principles and personal dignity in ways that demanded accountability. Agent Morrison, these photographs were taken without warrant or notification. Elena's attorney interjected. Unless you can demonstrate probable cause for surveillance activities, this evidence may be inadmissible and potentially illegal under federal privacy statutes. Morrison's response revealed complications that extended beyond surveillance procedures and suggested personal motivations that weren't immediately apparent. Dr. Vasquez, the surveillance wasn't initially focused on you. We've been tracking individuals who may have information about crimes committed 25 years ago, crimes that resulted in disappearances and deaths that were never properly investigated. The reference to 25 years ago caused Elena's breath to catch as she realized the temporal connection to her brother's disappearance. The timing was too precise to be coincidental, suggesting that Morrison's investigation was somehow related to David's case, and that current events were connected to family tragedies she'd spent decades trying to understand and resolve. Agent Morrison, are you investigating my brother's disappearance? She asked, her professional composure giving way to personal urgency that had been building for 25 years of unanswered questions and unresolved grief. Morrison's expression shifted subtly, revealing emotional investment that transcended professional responsibilities. Dr. Vasquez, your brother David didn't disappear. He was murdered by people who were trafficking homeless veterans for illegal medical experiments, and his death was covered up by officials who were paid to ensure that certain crimes never came to light. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow, forcing her to confront the possibility that David's disappearance hadn't been a tragic accident or personal choice, but the result of systematic victimization that had targeted vulnerable populations for exploitation and elimination. The suggestion that official corruption had prevented proper investigation explained why decades of private searches and legal inquiries had yielded no meaningful information about David's fate. Marcus felt the room's dynamics shift as personal tragedy intersected with federal investigation in ways that suggested connections he couldn't yet understand. The idea that homeless veterans were being targeted for illegal medical experiments resonated with his own experiences of institutional neglect and social invisibility, while also explaining why his technical competence might have attracted official attention. Agent Morrison. Marcus said carefully, are you suggesting that someone thought I might have information about crimes committed against homeless veterans 25 years ago? Morrison nodded, though his expression suggested complications that extended beyond historical crimes. Mr. Rivera. We believe that the people responsible for those crimes are still active, still targeting homeless veterans with technical skills, and still using methods that make their victims disappear without generating official attention or public concern. The scope of Morrison's allegations was staggering, suggesting criminal organizations that had operated with impunity for decades, while victimizing populations that society preferred to ignore. The idea that current events might be connected to historical crimes provided context for the federal investigation while raising new questions about Marcus and Elena's safety and the motivations of whoever had brought them together. Elena struggled to process the implications of Morrison's revelations while maintaining enough composure to ask practical questions about evidence and legal procedures. Agent Morrison, if you have evidence of murders and official corruption, why are you investigating Mr. Rivera and me instead of pursuing the actual criminals? Morrison's response revealed personal connections that explained his emotional investment while complicating the professional objectivity that federal investigations required. Dr. Vasquez, I've been investigating these crimes for 15 years because one of the victims was my father, David Morrison, a homeless veteran who disappeared from the same shelter where your brother was last seen. The revelation that Morrison was personally connected to the historical crimes transformed the entire context of their meeting and investigation. His pursuit of justice for his father's murder provided legitimate motivation for surveillance activities, while also suggesting that Elena and Marcus might be potential targets rather than subjects of investigation. Marcus realized that Morrison's suspicion of their meeting wasn't based on belief that they were criminals, but concern that they might be victims of the same criminal organization that had murdered their respective family members. The federal investigation was designed to protect them while gathering evidence about ongoing criminal activities that targeted homeless veterans for purposes that remained unclear but were apparently worth killing to protect. Agent Morrison, Elena said, her voice carrying new understanding about the complexity of their situation. Are you saying that whoever brought Marcus and me together might be connected to the people who killed our brothers? Morrison consulted additional files that contained evidence Elena and Marcus hadn't seen, including financial records, communication intercepts, and surveillance data that suggested systematic monitoring and manipulation of their activities. Dr. Vasquez, we believe that your meeting with Mr. Rivera was orchestrated by people who want to identify and eliminate homeless veterans with specific technical capabilities, and that your involvement provides them with access to renewable energy infrastructure that could be used for purposes we haven't yet determined. The suggestion that their partnership had been manipulated by criminal organizations, rather than developing naturally through shared interests and mutual respect, forced both Elena and Marcus to reconsider every aspect of their relationship and professional collaboration. The idea that their work might be serving criminal purposes rather than community benefit created doubts about their judgment and motivations that threatened to destroy the trust they'd built together. Marcus studied Morrison's evidence with the analytical skills that military service had developed, looking for patterns and connections that might reveal truth among the accusations and suspicions. The surveillance data showed systematic monitoring of multiple homeless veterans with technical backgrounds, suggesting targeting criteria that went beyond random criminal opportunity and approached the level of organizational planning that required significant resources and institutional protection. Agent Morrison, if this criminal organization has the capability to manipulate corporate executives and monitor federal investigations, what makes you think we can stop them by working within official channels? Marcus asked, recognizing that conventional law enforcement approaches might be inadequate for addressing crimes that had remained hidden for decades. Morrison's response revealed the broader scope of the federal investigation and the multi-agency cooperation that was working to address systematic victimization of vulnerable populations. Mr. Rivera, this investigation involves the FBI, Veterans Administration, Department of Energy, and several other agencies that are coordinating to identify and prosecute everyone involved in these crimes, from the people who select targets to the officials who cover up murders. Elena found herself torn between relief that her brother's death might finally receive justice and concern about the implications for her personal safety and professional responsibilities. The idea that criminal organizations were monitoring her activities and potentially manipulating her business decisions created security concerns that extended beyond individual protection to include corporate assets and community projects that served vulnerable populations. Agent Morrison, if we're potential targets, what kind of protection can federal agencies provide, and what restrictions would that place on our personal and professional activities? She asked, recognizing that witness protection might be necessary, but could also destroy the careers and relationships they'd worked to build. Morrison outlined security procedures that would allow Elena and Marcus to continue their collaboration while providing protection against criminal organizations that had demonstrated willingness to kill to protect their activities. The approach involved controlled exposure that would enable federal agencies to gather evidence while minimizing risk to potential targets who were also essential witnesses to ongoing crimes. The optimal strategy involves continuing your consulting relationship while implementing security measures that protect you from direct threats and enable us to monitor anyone who attempts to interfere with your activities, Morrison explained. Your work provides legitimate reasons for accessing renewable energy installations that criminals might be using for illegal purposes, while also serving communities that need the services you're providing. Marcus realized that federal protection might enable him to pursue meaningful work while contributing to justice for crimes that had affected his community and Elena's family. The opportunity to serve both personal and social purposes appealed to his military background and his commitment to using his expertise for projects that made positive differences in people's lives. Elena appreciated the possibility of continuing her renewable energy initiatives while helping to expose criminal activities that had remained hidden for decades. The chance to honor David's memory through work that protected other vulnerable veterans aligned with the values that had motivated her entrepreneurship and philanthropy throughout her career. Agent Morrison, Elena said, if we agree to participate in this investigation, what guarantees do we have that federal agencies will follow through on prosecuting the criminals and reforming the systems that allowed these crimes to continue for so long? Morrison's response carried the weight of personal commitment that transcended bureaucratic procedures and professional obligations. Dr. Vasquez, my father and your brother deserve justice, and the veterans who are currently at risk deserve protection. This investigation will continue until everyone responsible for these crimes is held accountable, regardless of their official positions or institutional connections. The meeting concluded with Elena and Marcus agreeing to continue their consulting relationship under federal protection while participating in an investigation that might finally provide answers about their brothers' deaths and justice for crimes that had targeted homeless veterans for decades. The partnership they'd built through shared expertise and mutual respect would now serve larger purposes that connected personal healing with social justice. Over the following weeks, Elena and Marcus worked together on renewable energy installations that served both community needs and federal investigation purposes. Their collaboration deepened as they navigated the complex dynamics of pursuing meaningful work while participating in an investigation that revealed the scope and persistence of criminal organizations that had operated with impunity for decades. The Veterans Haven facility became their primary focus, not just for technical repair but as a secure location where federal agents could monitor potential criminal activities. While Elena and Marcus provided services that improved residents' lives and opportunities. The solar installation they repaired exceeded all performance expectations, reducing operational costs while creating educational programs that prepared veterans for careers in renewable energy technology. Marcus found that federal protection enabled him to rebuild his career and his life while contributing to justice that extended beyond personal benefit to serve entire communities of vulnerable veterans. His technical expertise gained recognition through projects that demonstrated renewable energy's potential to strengthen communities, while his personal story inspired other veterans who were struggling with civilian transition challenges. Elena discovered that working with Marcus had reconnected her with the social mission that had originally motivated her entrepreneurship, while providing a path toward understanding and resolution of family tragedies that had shaped her entire adult life. Their consulting relationship evolved into genuine partnership that combined professional competence with personal commitment to serving communities that needed both technical expertise and advocacy support. The federal investigation eventually exposed criminal organizations that had victimized homeless veterans for illegal medical research, human trafficking, and organ harvesting operations that generated millions of dollars in illegal profits, while eliminating people whose disappearances generated minimal official attention. The prosecutions that resulted from the investigation led to convictions of corporate executives, government officials, and criminal operatives who had maintained these activities through corruption and violence for over 2 decades. Agent Morrison's investigation provided closure for dozens of families who had spent years wondering about missing relatives, while also revealing systematic exploitation that had affected thousands of homeless veterans across multiple states. The evidence gathered through Elena and Marcus's collaboration became essential to prosecutions that dismantled criminal networks and reformed institutional procedures that had enabled decades of victimization. Elena and Marcus learned that their initial meeting had indeed been orchestrated by criminal organizations that wanted to identify and eliminate homeless veterans with renewable energy expertise who might discover illegal activities at solar installations used to power secret facilities. Their natural compatibility and shared commitment to meaningful work had enabled them to build genuine partnership despite the artificial circumstances that had brought them together. The revelation that their relationship had been manipulated initially created doubt and mistrust. But their shared experiences working together and their mutual commitment to serving vulnerable communities proved stronger than the deception that had initiated their contact. They chose to focus on the authentic partnership they had built rather than the artificial circumstances that had made it possible. Morrison's investigation also revealed that David Vasquez and David Morrison had been murdered because they had discovered evidence of the illegal activities and attempted to report them to authorities who were later found to be participants in the criminal conspiracy. Their deaths had been covered up through official channels that classified their cases as voluntary disappearances rather than homicides, preventing proper investigation and enabling the criminal activities to continue. Elena found peace in learning that David had died trying to protect other vulnerable veterans, rather than simply disappearing due to personal struggles or mental health issues. The knowledge that his death had meaning, and that his killers would face justice provided closure that decades of uncertainty had prevented, while also connecting his memory to ongoing work that served communities he had cared about. Marcus discovered that his own survival and eventual partnership with Elena represented a form of justice for the veterans who had been victimized over the decades, transforming his technical expertise and personal resilience into tools for positive change that honored the memory of those who had been lost while serving those who remained vulnerable. The renewable energy projects that Elena and Marcus developed together became models for community-focused installations that combined technical excellence with social service, demonstrating that sustainable technology could strengthen vulnerable communities while providing economic and environmental benefits that extended far beyond immediate energy savings. Their consulting relationship evolved into a comprehensive social enterprise that provided renewable energy solutions to homeless shelters, veterans, facilities, and community organizations while creating job training programs that prepared formerly homeless individuals for careers in sustainable technology industries. The work combined Elena's corporate resources with Marcus's practical expertise and community connections to create programs that addressed both immediate needs and long-term empowerment. Elena's company, Zenith Solar, established a veterans initiative that prioritized hiring formerly homeless veterans for technical positions while providing housing, transportation, and career development support that addressed the systematic barriers that had contributed to their homelessness. Marcus became the program's director, using his personal experience and professional expertise to create pathways from streets to stable careers for veterans who had been overlooked by conventional employment systems. The partnership between Elena and Marcus demonstrated that meaningful relationships could develop even when initial contact was artificially created, provided that the people involved were committed to authentic interaction and shared purposes that transcended their individual circumstances. Their work together proved that corporate social responsibility could achieve genuine community benefit when executed, with personal commitment and practical understanding of the challenges faced by vulnerable populations. The federal investigation that had initially threatened to destroy their partnership ultimately strengthened their relationship by revealing shared values and mutual commitment that went beyond professional convenience or personal advantage. Their collaboration survived external manipulation and bureaucratic pressure because it was built on respect, competence, and dedication to work that served purposes larger than individual success. Elena and Marcus married 2 years after the federal prosecutions were completed, their relationship having evolved from professional partnership to personal commitment through shared work and mutual support during challenges that tested their individual resilience and their compatibility as collaborative partners. Their wedding was held at the Veterans Haven facility, surrounded by residents and staff who had witnessed their partnership's development and benefited from their combined expertise and dedication. Their marriage represented not just personal happiness but also symbolic victory over criminal organizations that had tried to exploit their individual vulnerabilities while destroying the communities they served. The love and partnership they built together honored the memory of their brothers while creating new possibilities for veterans and communities that needed both technical expertise and advocate support. The renewable energy installations that Elena and Marcus developed together continue to serve communities across multiple states, providing sustainable power while creating educational and employment opportunities for formerly homeless veterans who have gained technical skills and stable careers through programs that address both immediate needs and long-term empowerment. Their story demonstrates that hope and healing can emerge from tragedy and loss when people choose to focus on serving others rather than dwelling on personal grievances or seeking individual advantage. The partnership between Elena and Marcus proves that meaningful relationships can transcend artificial beginnings when they're built on authentic respect and shared commitment to work that makes positive differences in the world. Agent Morrison eventually left federal service to work with Elena and Marcus's social enterprise, using his investigative skills and legal background to advocate for policy reforms that protect homeless veterans while expanding access to renewable energy technology for underserved communities. His transition from federal agent to community advocate represents the kind of career change that becomes possible when people discover work that aligns with their personal values and professional capabilities. The criminal organizations that had operated for decades were dismantled through prosecutions that resulted in significant prison sentences for corporate executives and government officials who had enabled systematic victimization of homeless veterans. The legal precedents established through these cases created new protections for vulnerable populations while requiring greater accountability from institutions that serve or monitor them. Elena and Marcus's partnership continues to grow and evolve, combining renewable energy expertise with social advocacy to create programs that demonstrate sustainable technology's potential to strengthen communities while providing career opportunities for people who have been marginalized by conventional economic systems. Their work proves that corporate success and social responsibility can be mutually reinforcing when business leadership is guided by authentic commitment to serving communities that need both technical expertise and advocate support. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.